With most film companies finding themselves in trouble right now, Sony happens to be a company that finds itself in more trouble than most even before everything happened. Now let's talk about why everything happening more or less guarantees a MCU future for Spider-Man. So getting into talking about Spider-Man's future is always a big iffy situation because nobody knows what's going on. And just to further kind of explain that, not even Marvel Studios and Disney knew what was going on last year right up until the release, and then the news report hit, Disney, you're losing Spider-Man, and they were like, oh, maybe that's why Sony didn't call us to figure out where Spider-Man goes next. So again, it's a very shaky situation and relationship between Marvel Studios, Disney, and of course Sony. Now this goes all the way back to the old days, which obviously if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll go over it quickly. Back in the day, there was, certain parties that got their hands on certain characters. If you go to Sony in the late 90s, they ended up getting Ghost Rider, they ended up getting the likes of Spider-Man, Fox ended up getting the Fantastic Four and the X-Men, and then we jump fast forward to today where largely everything is back, and Spider-Man had his last outing where obviously his identity was revealed by Mysterio, and that left us on a big cliffhanger that might have never been resolved. Now, when we look at the Spider-Man future, we know it's very interesting. I guess I'll use interesting as the word here because Marvel Studios wants the character, but they don't need the character. That's the thing. They just want him because it's Spider-Man. At the same time, Sony is building their own universe on the side that started with Venom. Now, obviously, this year, we see that Sony is pushing forward a sequel to Venom, which obviously makes sense since the first one made them a lot of money. And of course, on the side, they were also making a Morbius film, which was supposed to come out this year, but it got delayed to next year. So again, their universe is getting off the ground. And the whole contractual dispute between the two happened because they couldn't come to an agreement on how to handle Spider-Man, how to handle the Venom franchise, and the exchange of money. Now, as most of you know, this was a complicated mess because Disney was making 5% off the initial box office opening, and they were putting zero into actually making the film other than their hands-on effort. So Kevin Feige and co were spending time, hiring people and getting scripts together and stuff, and then Sony was benefiting more. They reached a new agreement where, Disney is putting money in, and they're getting money back now, and Sony is hopeful that a relationship can continue. Now, of course, everything that's happened recently in Hollywood has kind of made everybody realize that Sony is probably the biggest studio out there out of the ones, the big five that are remaining, that's in the most amount of trouble because they own the least amount of IPs that garner interest, that garner big box office draw. Now, of course, Venom 2 is looking to fix this by introducing Carnage. They're hoping that this film will be able to save this year for them since, again, they had to delay Morbius, they had to delay Ghostbusters, and in the last couple years, we've seen quite a few failures, including what was supposed to be a big franchise soft reboot of the Men in Black. So again, they find themselves in an interesting position, and to me, when I look at it, I look at the likes of Ghostbusters, and that has nostalgia factor going into it, but nostalgia can only take you so far. And I know some Ghostbusters fans will get mad at me when I say that that franchise is not as popular as you think it is. Okay, fine, if you're 28 to 40 years old, you're nostalgic about it because you grew up and you remember the theme and the real Ghostbusters cartoon and all that, and you bought some of the toys and the Slimer drinks and cereal and whatever. But today's kids have no connection to Ghostbusters at all, and you can't rely on that franchise to save you alone. That brings us back to Spider-Man. Spider-Man is the constant that drives money, even if the film is bad. The Amazing Spider-Man 2, for example, it pulls in money. So Sony is left in an interesting position when it comes to franchising. Spider-Man properties make money, but they want out of the MCU. Now, of course, previously we've heard people with Marvel Studios, with Disney, talk about how much they love Spider-Man and they want him there. We've heard the Sony side of things from Amy Pascal, who of course will be leaving for Universal soon. She says that they love the partnership, that she hopes that they continue and once she's gone. And she says that everything they're doing is quote unquote, and you guys have heard this one before, adjacent to the MCU, like a sidestep, like Marvel Studios, Marvel TV shows like Daredevil and all that. So again, when you look at it now, I think right now it more or less cements that Sony has no other choice but to keep Spider-Man in the MCU. His future is more or less guaranteed now when you look at everything happening around Hollywood. Because let's be real, this year is going to be terrible for Sony for profits when it comes to films. Next year, who knows how that's going to go. And having massive production delays on everything that they were developing, Uncharted, how many more times can Uncharted be delayed? Spider-Man being one of these that's highly affected, that's always a big heavy hitter for them in that end of June, early July release. Again, they're not going to have that if things keep falling behind schedule. So they're going to have to assess the situation. Now, what kind of guarantees it here is the fact that Disney, of course, wants Spider-Man because he's integral to their future. If you look at how they're building up, Disney theme parks, oh, Spider-Man, Avengers Campus, Spider-Man this, Spider-Man that. Hey, Sony, you got Spider-Man exclusive on your console. Spider-Man merchandise sells through the roof. It outsells all other superheroes. Again, they see the value of the character, and now that they have a vested interest financially in Spider-Man, in these films that are being developed, they have an interest in making sure that everything that's coming out that's connected to that is a success. Because if it starts falling through, if it starts falling apart, if it starts painting a bad picture on Spider-Man, that doesn't help Marvel Studios. And what I'm saying is, Spider-Man is going to interact with Venom, whether Marvel Studios likes it or not, whether they want it or not. So it's in their best interest to try to talk to Sony and work out a partnership, an agreement, to work out some sort of thing where they make sure that everything works out. Now, why this is important is we know Kevin Feige, every single Marvel film, not even just Marvel Studios, like New Mutants, for example, Dark Phoenix, he was able to look at those scripts and give them pointers for all of them. It's just if you listen to them, he now can go in and look at everything and go, well, I see what you're doing with Venom. If you're using the same Spider-Man we're using, he's in your universe, we're going to have an issue if things contradict one another, which Venom 1 already does. So let's work with this to make sure it all clicks together. And again, if we go to Morbius, Spider-Man is wanted for murder, huh? Well, okay, interesting. You're picking up pieces from the MCU. So again, I think right now, the way we look at it is Spider-Man is a guaranteed mainstay. And even if for some reason, they finish the third film, they're like, well, that's it, we're not doing a fourth one. Sony's going to do another film with Tom Holland as Spider-Man, and that's technically a fourth one, right? Even if it's a multiverse film, even if it's something, because it's picking up pieces and threads that are left over from the MCU. So one way or another, you're getting more sequels to Spider-Man, and it's in Sony's best interest to play ball with Disney, because again, Disney has the power of the Avengers brand, and using that. And let's say when they get to Avengers 5, they all sit down and they start talking about it, and they realize, what we really need? We need Spider-Man in Avengers 5. Hey, Sony, can we have him? Okay. Sony goes, sure, but we want you to include one of our characters we develop solo on the side. All right, who you got? Well, we have Spider-Woman. Okay, I guess Spider-Woman's coming into our film. Again, it's a handshake. It's a you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. And right now, the way Hollywood is going, the way Sony is looking as a company, it's not good for them unless they start kind of understanding that for their own survival, they need help. Spider-Man will in fact stay in the MCU and his future is guaranteed, because Sony has no other option. And if they pull him again, the fans will be outraged. So you don't want that again, because that brings you back to step one, where fans just rage on you the entire time. It's just a bad look for them.